Senate will come to order. Dr. Black's chaplain in the Senate will open the Senate with prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal God, the giver of every good and perfect gift, thank you for the favor which you have given to humanity. Lord, we're grateful for the nobility you have placed in human hearts that enables us to toil until we pass the breaking point and still not break. Thank you that you have enabled us to love until even self is forgotten. Thank you also for those who willingly sacrifice even life itself for the things they hold dear. Thank you that goodness always haunts us and sin ever brings its remorse. Thank you for the members of this legislative body who work to be your ambassadors of reconciliation in a divided world. May they commit their time, effort, and resources to formulate public policy in keeping with your will for our beloved nation and world. We pray in your powerful name. Amen.
Will you please join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. President, thank you. You did great. Under the previous order, leadership time is reserved. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session and resume consideration of the following nominee, to which the clerk will report.
Nomination, Environmental Protection Agency, Sean Donahue of Florida to be an assistant administrator.
Senator from Iowa.
Today, we're approaching the end of this year's National Police Week. So I come to the floor to talk about what Congress can do to support the brave men and women who protect us. In a few moments, I'll go to the Senate Judiciary Committee, where I am chair, to take up 8 bills that have worked out with Ranking Member Durbin and members of the committee. In other words, bipartisan bills. Each of these bills supports law enforcement and gives law enforcement critical tools to protect us Americans. For example, one of these bills protects first responders from accidental exposure to fentanyl. Another bill reauthorizes the task force that helps keep our children safe online. A third bill bolsters the PSOB program to protect first responders' loved ones should they bravely sacrifice themselves in the line of duty. That's just a sampling of the list of bipartisan bills that we'll be considering today. So I take this opportunity to thank my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for taking this National Police Week seriously, very seriously. I've always backed the blue, and that's why I've set these 8 bills on the committee's agenda. Once these bills are reported out of committee, I'm committed to moving them through the Senate expeditiously, and I assume through their bipartisan sponsorship that we'll have bipartisan support on the floor of the United States Senate. So I call on my colleagues then to join me in supporting our law enforcement community by passing my Police Week bills as quickly as possible. I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
Without objection, clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
call. Okay. Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, it's Police Week this week, the yearly observance recognizing the service and sacrifice of our nation's law enforcement officers. Mr. President, they are a special breed, the men and women who safeguard our communities. I'm a dad and a grandfather, and I think every parent knows that feeling when they place that baby in your arms for the first time, that knowledge that you would do anything to protect this person. But the incredible thing about police officers, Mr. President, is that they have that protective instinct for all of us. They don't just volunteer to step between their loved ones in danger, they volunteer to step between any of us in danger. Not because they know us, but simply because we are human beings and need to be protected. It's a natural human instinct to run from danger, but police officers go out to meet it. And they go out to meet it not knowing what the day will bring. Like the police officer in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, who was shot earlier this year while pursuing a suspect with multiple outstanding warrants for his arrest. Or like Moody County Chief Deputy Sheriff Ken Prorock of South Dakota, who was killed in line of duty in February of last year and who was honored in this year's Police Week resolution. Chief Deputy Prorock was killed after reportedly being deliberately struck by a car driven by a fleeing suspect being pursued by Madison police. He was not a member of the Madison police, but he heard the call for assistance on the radio, and he went out to help. He knew that he was placing himself in danger, knew that he could be risking his life, but he went anyway. And as I said last year, Mr. President, that is the heroism of Chief Deputy Prorock and all of the men and women across our country who serve in our nation's police forces and who, when they hear a call for help, go out and answer it. This is Police Week, and every day I am grateful for the men and women of our nation's law enforcement community, and particularly grateful for all of our South Dakota officers who work tirelessly to safeguard our communities. Safeguard our communities and build them up. Because police officers do more than fight crime and stand between us and danger. They are an active and supportive presence in our communities, whether leading safety classes, building relationships with local youth, or helping a stranded driver or a family in need. I'm also profoundly grateful for the service of the United States Capitol Police, who are on the front lines here in Washington, D.C. every day. There's no getting away from the fact that there are dangers associated with working in the Capitol. And I'm tremendously grateful for the men and women who keep us safe, whether they're protecting dignitaries, standing guard on the Capitol steps, or responding to threats. Finally, Mr. President, as we recognize the service and sacrifice of our nation's police officers, we should recognize the service and sacrifice of their families as well. It's not always easy to have a police officer for a husband or a wife, a mom or a dad. The hours can be long and irregular. The job is a heavy one. And there is always the knowledge at the back of your mind that your mom and dad, or dad, your husband or wife, is out there confronting danger, and that there's always a chance he or she might not make it home. And so we thank our nation's police officers. We also want to make sure to thank their families who also serve. And to all of our nation's law enforcement officers, thank you. Thank you for serving our communities, for putting your lives on the line every day. Thank you for all the sacrifices you make to keep us safe. And God bless you all. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
Mr. President,
Democratic Leader.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, this morning, Donald Trump's trade war strikes again. Walmart announced today it plans to raise prices in stores across America because of Donald Trump's tariffs. Here is what Walmart will say on its earnings call. Quote, given the magnitude of the tariffs, even at the reduced levels announced this week, we aren't able to absorb all the pressure given the reality of narrow retail margins, unquote. Walmart's raising prices is a canary in the coal mine for the devastation Trump's tariffs will have on Main Street. If a retailer as big as Walmart can't escape the pain of tariffs, what chance do small businesses have? Their customers are inevitably going to see prices rise. Walmart's announcement is a glaring reminder that even after supposedly backtracking on some of his tariffs, significant damage will not go away. The chaos he's unleashed is eating away at retailers, restaurants, small businesses, and middle-class families' wallets. It's still estimated these tariffs will cost thousands of dollars for each family each year. Donald Trump's tariffs are nothing more than a tax hike on consumers. I am supporting legislation with Jamie Raskin to require large retailers to start displaying clearly to customers precisely how much tariffs are contributing to the total price of products. Americans deserve transparency. If Trump's tariffs are causing prices to go up, no fault of the retailer, the American consumer ought to know it. Walmart should start displaying in their stores and online how much tariffs actually contribute to the final price of their goods. So should all other big retailers. America should know how Trump's tariffs are hurting them. People understand it, are beginning to understand it, but this display will just hit it home every time they buy a good. It shows you how destructive and chaotic Donald Trump's trade war has been. He should backtrack, totally backtrack, before we enter a recession. Specific tariffs that deal with how China treats us, the Chinese government, the Chinese economy treats us, that's fine. Not this crazy, go after everybody, poorly put together, and constantly changing tariff regime. On cartels. Well, Donald Trump and our Republican friends love to talk about border security, how they're tough on border security, more than just about anything else. So you can imagine our surprise to read that President Trump is making deals with drug cartels, El Chapo, to be precise, to come into our country. Amazing. This week, it's hard to believe, you can't make this stuff up. Reports came out that Donald Trump made a deal to allow 17 relatives of El Chapo, that's right, El Chapo, a dangerous, murderous, notorious drug lord in U.S. custody, into the United States. El Chapo was head of the notorious Sinaloa cartel, which was designated a terrorist organization back in February. And now letting their relatives in? Republicans want to talk about importing criminals? Where is the outrage on Donald Trump letting the family of the world's most dangerous cartel enter the United States? Let's hear it from our Republican friends. This is a total disgrace. Republicans should be up in arms if they want to have any credibility about being tough against drug traffickers, drug criminals, drug cartels. This isn't just being soft on crime. It's rolling out a welcome mat to El Chapo and his family and inviting it into our country. But if you're related to El Chapo, Donald Trump says, come right in, welcome to America. He'll roll out the red carpet. It's lunacy. It's a disgrace. Donald Trump has no problem deporting U.S. citizens, but he'll grant parole for the family of drug traffickers. What message does this send to other drug lords, criminals, terrorists Where are our Republican colleagues on this? Where is the outrage from the other side of the aisle, who say they want to prevent criminals from crossing our borders? Now on reconciliation and SNAP. So the Republicans' so-called big, beautiful bill is one of the most heinous, callous, and cruel proposals we've ever seen. Republicans don't want to axe health care for 14 million Americans, which is going to mean higher costs for even many more millions of Americans. They also want massive cuts to SNAP, the largest, most effective anti-hunger program in America. Republicans want to cut SNAP benefits by as much as $310 billion, the largest cuts to anti-hunger funding in history. This would mean the average person on SNAP would be left with just $5 a day for food. That is morally bankrupt. $5 a day for food, when a dozen eggs alone costs more than that. Republicans are literally stealing food away from hungry kids, from seniors, from veterans, to finance tax breaks for the ultra-rich. Give me a break. This is cruel, this is mean, heartless, and counterproductive. A hungry child can't learn, often grows up to have a life that is not as productive as others who are fed can have. The Republican cuts to SNAP would cut 6 million Americans off from food. It would reduce food benefits for 5 million more Americans. 4 million children, 4 million children will go to bed hungry because of this cruelty to pay for tax cuts for billionaires. Isn't it incredible? I'd even like to ask these billionaires who are so hell-bent on reducing their own taxes if they're happy taking money away from hungry children and not feeding them. 11 million people will go hungry under the Republicans' bill, the biggest cut to food assistance in American history. That's the Republican idea of beautiful? Taking food away from the mouths of hungry kids, all for tax breaks for billionaires? It's not beautiful, it's ugly, very ugly. Republicans will continue to defend their SNAP benefit cuts, as Republicans will continue to defend their SNAP cuts as, quote, reducing fraud, waste, abuse. So ask them this. Ask our Republican friends this. Which category does a hungry 7-year-old fall under? Are they waste? Are they fraud? Are they abuse? What Republicans are really doing is increasing hunger, increasing poverty, increasing costs for states and families, lowering the productive lives that our future adult citizens can have, all to increase the wealth of the ultra-rich. It is shameful. It is sad. On the chip deal, Donald Trump says he's strong on China, but his trip to the Middle East shows once again that this is mostly talk with very little substance. Just like in his recent reduction in tariffs with China, America got almost nothing and China got everything. This, again, the chip deal shows that China's running circles, the Chinese government is running circles around Donald Trump. Right now, the Trump administration is in talks for a so-called chip deal with Saudi Arabia and the UAE that would greenlight the sale of the most sensitive U.S. chip technology in exchange for vague promises of more foreign investment. This deal could very well be dangerous because we have no clarity on how the Saudis and Emiratis will prevent the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese government, the Chinese manufacturing establishment from getting their hands on these chips. Inevitably, when foreign countries end up with American-made chips, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, sooner or later gets hold of these American chips and their secrets in them. That's why we've had such strong restrictions against exporting these chips to other countries. This deal screams security risk and loophole, as China could be ready to exploit American technology. No respected security expert will tell you with a straight face that these advanced chips won't eventually find their way into the AI supercomputers of the Chinese government and manufacturers. And I'm not the only one worried. It's not just Democrats worried on this, thank God. The Republican chair of the House Select Committee on the CCP has expressed similar concerns about these deals. Even worse, if we send our best chips to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, we'll be giving them the tools they need to build the best IA supercomputers in the world, in their countries, not America. What's this about bringing jobs and high-end technology back to the country, which we Democrats worked so long and hard to do successfully in the Science and Chips bill? All of a sudden, it's okay to give it to other countries, especially other countries whose security might be not as tight as ours, and allow the Chinese government to get hold of these chips? I urge Secretary Rubio, who has been a China hawk, and Secretary Lutnick to prevent these deals from proceeding until we can be dead certain that these chips won't make their way into Chinese government hands. Remember that earlier this year, DeepSeek announced the development of an incredibly powerful AI model built with American chips. We have to double down on blocking the flow of our AI chips to China directly and indirectly through third countries. The Trump administration also needs to protect against offshoring of American AI technology. AI is the industry of our time. It should be proudly made in America by American workers, not sent overseas to the highest bidder. Why did Trump make this deal? Who the heck knows? The way he trades for things for his own personal aggrandizement and for his own ego and to please a few of his friends. Lord knows why they got hold of these chips, why they're getting hold of these chips, what was done in exchange that made Trump happy. If Trump's goal in the Middle East is to enrich himself long term, then by all accounts, he's knocking it out of the park. But if his goal is to ensure American security and American AI leadership, this deal would be like a stick of lit dynamite. I yield the floor.
Republican Whip.
Mr. President, today the Senate is going to vote on what's called the Kane-Van Hollen resolution. To me, it is a political stunt, and I will vote against it. It's not about transparency. It's not about human rights. It's about bringing a verified member of MS-13, a terrorist group, criminals, and bringing that member back into the United States. So today, Senate Democrats are voting once again to defend illegal immigrant criminals. They seem to like to do that. It's hard to believe, but it's true. That's who Senate Democrats are here to protect, and that's who Senate Democrats seem to want to defend. So they're going to come to floor today, and they're going to line up to express their blind loyalty and their belligerent support for illegal immigrant criminals. Seems to be the party model right now. No Democrats are going to be able to answer the simple question, though: how does allowing MS-13 gang members to roam free in our communities make our communities or make our country safer? Well, I'll tell you the answer: it doesn't. You allow illegal immigrant criminals into our country, you let them stay in our country, it makes all of us less safe. Under unified Republican government, illegal border crossings have plummeted. Illegal crossings are down 93% compared to last year. 93% this year over last year. Republicans are going to continue to fight for protecting American communities and protect our communities against illegal immigrant criminals. Now, Mr. President, on the matter that I hope to address today, a separate matter from that, I rise to speak today about improving and modernizing the Endangered Species Act. The Endangered Species Act became a law in this country 52 years ago, 1973. And it came to be a law for the right reasons. But what we know is since then, Washington bureaucrats have added over 2,400 species of plants as well as animals to the list. And of those 2,400, only 54 species have ever left the list. Just 54 species out of over 2,000 in 52 years. Mr. President, you know I'm a doctor, I'm a surgeon, I practiced orthopedic surgery in Casper, Wyoming for over 20 years. As a doctor, if I put 100 patients on life support and only 3 recovered, I'd lose my license. And that's what's happening with the Endangered Species Act. Only 3% of those that were put on the list have ever come off. So why do we accept this level of failure with the Endangered Species Act? When it became law, it was a bipartisan vote. People thought it was a good idea to save endangered species. And the law has done good work to save species from extinction. We've seen the great work being done. The grizzly bear has come back from the brink of extinction. The bald eagle, when the grizzly bear was listed in 1975, 50 years ago, we're down to 136 grizzly bears. The federal government set an ambitious goal. They said, we want to make sure we can get to 500. We think that's the safe version. Go from 136, get back up to 500. And of course, the grizzly bears are Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming, areas around that. Well, Mr. President, today there are over 1,000 grizzly bears in the Yellowstone area. From 136 to the 500, blew right back there. Now there are over 1,000. But the grizzly bear is still on the list. So the law worked in terms of getting the recovery. It identified a species in danger. It helped them recover. But the law was also intended to protect species so well that they no longer need protection, so it's time to get them off the list. The law was never intended to put something on the list and leave them there forever. It'd be like a doctor leaving a patient in intensive care, even though they've gotten better. Time to discharge them from the hospital. But that's not what's happening today. The grizzly bear remains listed. Why? After going from 136 to the 500 they said would be the really good number, now to double that to 1,000? Well, they're trapped in a bureaucracy, the bureaucracy of Washington, D.C. and the courts, because the Endangered Species Act is being weaponized by environmental activists and extremists. Even the Washington Post editorial board agrees. The editorial board argued this month, the Washington Post editorial, which is no real friend of conservatives, it says, it has become difficult to delist a species even after it has met its recovery goal. Why? It says, due to threats of litigation. That's what's happening. The activist judges and activist environmental extremists do everything they can to prevent things from coming off the list, even species that are fully recovered. The Washington Post is right. The Endangered Species Act and law is broken. So to fix it, the editorial board calls for what they describe as a cooling off period. for lawsuits, while states like Wyoming monitor recovered species. I actually introduced legislation to that effect in the past. Now the Washington Post says it's a good idea. I think Congress should listen. So this week, Senator Lummis, Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming, Congresswoman Harriet Hageman, and I sent a letter to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with our colleagues from Montana and Idaho. Because Montana and Idaho border Yellowstone National Park, parks of the park are in those states. The great preponderance of Yellowstone is in Wyoming, borders in the areas. But the grizzly bears don't understand the barriers of the park. They go beyond the barriers. They're out in communities. They're impacting schools, they're impacting families, they're impacting livestock and wildlife. And we're calling on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to reverse last-minute interference that now has happened from the Biden administration that punishes states like Wyoming and Idaho and Montana for successfully managing the full recovery of the grizzly bear. It's a federal boondoggle. We need to return the management of the recovered grizzly bears to the states where it belongs. And this is not meant to be a partisan issue, it's a practical one. Wyoming has spent more than $50 million to help the grizzly bears' recovery. Our state has changed our laws in order to meet federal standards to manage species after they're removed from the list. Our state management agencies continue to be in the field every day. They're working to protect the grizzly bears and other wildlife. Wyoming's good work and sound management practices have proven to be very successful. The numbers tell the story. 136 grizzly bears to 500 and now to 1,000. But when you keep the grizzly bears under Washington's control, it hurts people in communities all around Wyoming and in Montana and in Idaho. Homeowners face bears in their backyards, and these are killer bears. Self-defense against the bears risks prosecution. Farmers and ranchers are losing livestock. We should be able to protect our family and our property in Wyoming. The Endangered Species Act is a very important law. It needs to be improved. It needs to be updated. It needs to be modernized. The Endangered Species Act was last amended in 1988, 37 years ago. Even the U.S. Constitution was amended more recently than the Endangered Species Act. Both Democrat and Republican administrations in the past have acted to delist the grizzly bear. Yet in another case of midnight meddling, the Biden administration relisted the grizzly bear in January, right before they headed out the door, once again kissing up to the environmental extremists. This is also the continued problem of lawfare from environmental groups who engage in venue shopping for partisan liberal judges. And they can always find one. Wyoming shouldn't need Washington's permission to protect our land, to protect our people, to protect our wildlife, and to protect our way of life. So I'm going to continue to work closely, Mr. President, with the Interior Secretary, Doug Burgum, to empower the states to manage the recovered grizzly bear, because it's time for Wyoming, not Washington, to be in charge of managing this fully recovered species. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Absence of a quorum.
Clerk, call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Mr. President,
Senator from Nevada.
are we in a quorum call?
We are.
I'd ask unanimous consent to rescind the quorum call. Mr. President, this week is National Police Week. During this week, we rightfully honor the brave men and women who put their lives on the line every single day to keep our families safe. And for me, supporting law enforcement it is personal. My husband is a retired law enforcement officer. I've worked for years as a prosecutor, side by side with law enforcement in the state of Nevada, and quite honestly here in Washington, D.C. I've seen firsthand the sacrifices our officers and their families make to keep our communities across the country safe. I also know how thinly stretched our police departments are across the country. Police departments are understaffed, and our officers are quite often overworked. Compounding the staffing shortages, it is becoming more and more difficult for our police departments to recruit and retain qualified officers. Once those officers are recruited, police departments often struggle to find the resources to train them. And when they suffer traumatic experiences in the line of duty, which also happens quite often, officers routinely don't get the mental health care that they need. Police officers risk serious injury every day. And members of the communities working with them, they see the worst of the worst. And that's why the mental health and stress of the job takes its toll amongst even the strongest of our men and women in law enforcement. I also know that small local police departments are the backbone of public safety for our rural, suburban, and our tribal communities across the country. And they often face the greatest hurdles to accessing resources. There are federal grant programs available for law enforcement agencies, many of which I've personally fought to support, but they often require long and confusing applications to secure. Let's face it, the thousands of police departments in small towns across the country that have fewer than 10 full-time officers simply do not have the capacity to keep their communities safe and spend hours filling out burdensome grant paperwork. So, along with my colleague during National Police Week, Senator Grassley from Iowa and I have been working on legislation to support our law enforcement officers. It's called the Invest to Protect Act. And this bipartisan legislation would provide $250 million in funding through the Community-Oriented Policing Services, or the COPS grant program, that specifically is out there to help law enforcement. This particular program would identify those law enforcement agencies with under 175 officers. This funding could be used to support critical training, mental health and recruitment and retention measures. This training and grant funding would be essential in our rural, our tribal, and our suburban communities. That is why this legislation is so important and why it's bipartisan. This should never be a partisan issue. This particular piece of legislation that Chuck Grassley and I introduced, Senator Grassley, passed 5 years ago, unanimous consent. Same piece of legislation. And I am hopeful, working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, that we will pass this again, the sooner the better, so that we can move this out of the Congress, get it to the President's desk for signature, and show our support for all law enforcement across this nation, particularly at a time during National Police Week when we are here to remember the ultimate sacrifice so many law enforcement officers have made across this country to keep our communities safe. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Allen.
Mr. President, I rise to oppose the nomination of Sean Donahue of Florida to serve as General Counsel of the Environmental Protection Agency. Mr. Donahue may be the most unfit nominee ever for any federal agency general counsel. As I said in my remarks in committee, this guy would have trouble getting an entry-level legal position in any one of our offices. Yet, here we are. The Constitution provides the Senate with advice and consent power. This power should carry some meaning. Advice and consent should not be empty words, a rubber stamp. The Senate confirmation vote on Mr. Donahue that is moments away shows how little we care to live up to that constitutional responsibility. This is a truly preposterous nominee. The EPA General Counsel is the chief legal advisor to EPA on environmental laws, including the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Superfund Act, and others, on the agency's development and implementation of regulations under its various statutes, and on litigation strategy with DOJ in court challenges to agency actions. The General Counsel oversees nearly 200 lawyers and 300 total staff. Mr. Donahue has no experience qualifying him to do any of these things. He has never tried a case to verdict, never taken a deposition, never signed a pleading, never argued a motion. He has never personally litigated any case, let alone federal cases implicating our nation's most important environmental laws. What has he done? Mr. Donahue practiced law for a year and a half at a small firm in Buffalo that fired him for his version being, quote, overloaded with work. He was not even a member of the New York bar, however, and he then failed the D.C. bar on his first attempt. He claims in New York to have supervised 6 to 8 individuals, which seems a stretch for someone not even a member of the bar. And there is no evidence, whatever minimal and unsuccessful legal experience Mr. Donahue had, that any work he may have done bore at all on the laws and regulations applicable to EPA. The previous 7 Senate-confirmed EPA general counsels were pretty impressive. Counsel Prito, 2 decades in federal service, including as general counsel at both the Department of Agriculture and DOJ's Energy and Natural Resources Division. Counsel Leopold, 14 years as an environmental lawyer, general counsel of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Counsel Garbo, 21 years, practicing environmental law in the public and private sectors, including at EPA and DOJ. Counsel Fulton, 22 years of leadership roles at EPA, following 8 years at DOJ's Environment and Natural Resources Division. Counsel Martella, Court of Appeals law clerk, 7 years with the Natural Resources section of DOJ, acting EPA general counsel. Counsel Clay, law firm for 9 years, chief counsel to the Senate Environment Public Works Committee for 5 years, senior counselor to the Secretary of the Interior. Counsel Fabricant, 2 years in private practice and 5 years as counsel, then chief counsel to then New Jersey Governor Christie Todd Whitman. This guy, a year and a half, fired, then in-house counsel at a solar company, tried no cases ever. So why him? Well, I suspect part of it is that he'll be so grateful that he'll do whatever he's told. We've actually seen this already, even before his confirmation. He testified that the Trump administration's current assault on congressionally authorized, appropriated, and obligated funding was legal. Never mind multiple federal district court orders to the contrary. I'd love to see him take that argument into those courts that had already found those orders illegal. Second, and perhaps more telling, who cares at EPA if their counsel has neither experience nor knowledge? They're going to be overseen by the fossil fuel industry anyway. He'll be told what to do by fossil fuel polluter lawyers, so all he'll have to do is put what they want on EPA letterhead and file it. Oh, yeah, and the NEPO thing. His significant other is the Deputy Director of Presidential Personnel, a role with purview over every political appointment, including his. Mr. President, this is a pretty bleak low point in Senate nominations history. This is the last chance to pull back from the brink of confirming likely the most flagrantly unqualified person ever for an agency general counsel position. I urge my colleagues to vote no. And I yield the floor.
Question occurs on the nomination. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Moreno, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Barrasso, Blackburn, Daines, Ernst, Hawley, Husted, Johnson, Kennedy, Marshall, Moreno, Schmidt, Scott of Florida, Sheehy, Thune, Tuberville. Senators voting in the negative: Bennett, Cantwell, Cortez Masto, Durbin, Gallego, Hassan, Hirono, Kim, Murray, Ossoff, Padilla, Rosen, Schiff, Smith, Warner, Warnock, Welch, Whitehouse, Wyden. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Merkley, no. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. Mullen, aye. Mr. Langford, aye. Mr. Crapo, aye. Mr. Budd, aye. Mr. Bozeman, aye. Ms. Klobuchar, no. Mrs. Capito, aye. Mr. Wicker, aye. Mr. Cornyn, aye. Mr. Cassidy, aye. Ms. Blunt Rochester, no. Mr. King, no. Mr. Rounds, aye. Ms. Duckworth, no. Mr. Young, aye. Mr. Banks, aye. Mrs. Fisher, aye. Mr. Curtis, aye. Ms. Warren, no. Mr. Hickenlooper, no. Mr. Grassley, aye. Mr. Paul, aye. Mr. Heinrich, no. Mr. Sanders, no. Mr. Reed, no. Mr. Justice, aye. Mrs. Moody, aye. Mr. Murphy, no. Mrs. Brett, aye. Mr. Tillis, aye. Mr. Kane, no. Mr. Schatz, no. Mr. Coons, no. Mrs. Shaheen, no. Mr. Risch, aye. Mr. Schumer, no. Ms. Lummis, aye. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. Booker, no. Mr. Lee, aye. Mr. Sullivan, aye. Mr. Kramer, aye. Mr. Ricketts, aye. Ms. Also Brooks, no. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mr. Peters, no. Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Van Hollen, no. Mrs. Hyde Smith, aye. Ms. Baldwin, no. Mr. Cotton, aye. Mr. Lujan, no. Mr. Fetterman, no. Mr. Haggerty, Mr. Haggerty, aye. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Ms. Slotkin, no. Mr. Blumenthal, no. Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Mr. Moran, aye.